My father used to have a notebook in the truck, in the food truck, the catering truck that we used to have. We would often refer to this as La Libreta. This notebook had in it all the names of people who my dad had extended credit to. This simply meant those who could not afford to pay him or those who couldn't pay him at the time of purchase. This notebook, La Libreta, was part of the truck. It was kept in a very accessible part of the truck, right next to the coffee station where customers could get their fixings in their morning coffee. It was easy to access. You just had to open up this little door, and there it would be. It was probably a lot of money owed to my folks. It was probably the modern day blockchain. It was accessible to everyone, and everyone who wanted to be a part of it, this IOU system, which was more like a friendship economy. Everybody was in it. It truly was a peer-to-peer arrangement. But that wasn't why it was important. The importance of this libreta was that it meant people got to eat. My name is Isidro Salas, and welcome to 10,000 Tacos. If you are new to the show, thank you very much for coming on board. But if, to get more of what the show is about, I highly encourage you to go back to the previous episodes and try to catch up a little bit. And hopefully you stick around. But if you are a returning audience member, thank you very much. Thank you for making us a part of your day. And let's get started. So I want to try something a little bit different. I want to bring into the show what I call a segment. I'll call the segment Chardonnay Problems. And what is Chardonnay? Chardonnay, real quick, is wine, right? And Chardonnay problems are those problems where they're not big problems. And so, because it's a whiny problem, I'm a whiny little, I can't say that. But it's basically a little problem I shouldn't have. Like, really, there's other problems in the world, Isidro. So don't, this is a problem. It's not a big problem. Solve it. Quit whining. So it's a Chardonnay problem. And this problem, it's a very small one, again. But today, in the world we live in, we have these robocalls, right? I don't know if you've experienced them. The rest of the world has, especially here in the U.S., where you're just getting calls every single day from marketers, from robos, and scammers. So most people, or at least me, I don't pick up my phone anymore. I don't answer it because even though I run a business, even though I'm trying to get the podcast going I figure if somebody's trying to get a hold of me through a phone call that I don't recognize, they'll leave a message, right? As old school as that is, then they'll leave a message. But the Chardonnay problem happens here. Most of us, and again, maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but most of us do not use the phone as a phone anymore. We're either texting, we're either on social networks, we're either online banking, or we're doing whatever, but rarely do people use their phones. Now, yes, if your job requires you to be on the phone, but for the most part, phones aren't really used. So here's the problem. Why is it that when you do use your phone, you always get another call from somebody that you know? Why is that? The phone could be silent all day, but as soon as you get a phone call with somebody that you know, you pick it up and you start talking. Within a few minutes, now your mom is calling or your other friend is calling, and you're like, oh, well, hold on. And the stress that it brings, how do people know to call you when you are on the phone? But when you're not on the phone with another call, nobody calls you. Yeah. Chardonnay problem. Let's get into the show. Sorry about that. I just lost a few audience members. I'm sorry. But let's get on with the show. So about 8 years ago, a friend of mine had asked me if I wanted to volunteer and help pour alcohol, beer, at festivals for an organization that was providing this service at concerts in downtown San Jose. It was a very fun event to be at. Lots of people would show up. And once in a great while, you would have some great bands and performances. So I totally said yes. I would help. And it was a voluntary job. It wasn't something that you're getting paid for. However, if you were lucky enough to be in the booths where people would order beer, there was always a tip jar. And most people would leave tips. At the end of the evening, after we put away everything and counted and did everything to close it up, the people in the booth, which was typically about 4 of us, we would split the tips between all of us. So depending on how popular or how crowded the event was that evening, if it was a popular act, we would split sometimes anywhere from $200 to $300 between 4 people. That was pretty good change. But anyway, that's not what this is about. On one evening, it was a very, very crowded event. And because it was crowded, there were a lot of beer sales. At the end of the evening, we got to split a lot of tips. So I ended up having close to like $100 in cash money in my pocket, which was cool, right? It's cash. Now, don't tell the U.S. government. Actually, it doesn't matter because after you make a certain amount, then you have to report it. This was definitely under that amount. But anyway, it was nice to have that in my pocket. So a friend of mine and she had given me a ride there. So we were walking back to the car and we had to walk quite a ways. We had to walk through a certain part of town that usually has a lot of homeless on the street. So as I was passing by and we're walking to the car, I saw this lady that was on the floor. She was sitting down there. And something just told me, hey, just give her some money. So I pulled out the money that I had and I took out a 20 and I put it in a little cup that she had. And the friend, I remember her asking, why did you just do that? I said, oh, well, just felt like giving it to her. She tells me, well, I don't like giving people money like that because you don't know what they're going to do with it. And it's just a waste of money. And I just thought, yeah, perhaps you're right. I could understand that. But I just remember not responding. But it bugged me. And the thought that was in my head was, you don't know. You don't know what they do. You don't know what they're going to do with it. That's the thing I was thinking. Now, I couldn't let her know that because it probably would have started some sort of debate that wasn't going to end correctly or nicely, and plus I needed a ride home. So I left it at that. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because what makes us do that? What makes us have that feeling of helping people who are less fortunate? And how does this fit with a notebook, a libreta? Why are you telling Why are you telling me this, Isidro? Probably asking. Hang in there, please. But today on the show, I want to tell you why this little book, this libreta, gave me a perspective way back then about the need to help people. Helping people without the need to ask why or even to justify it. So again, getting back to this notebook, this line of credit notebook that my dad used to have, you might be asking, how did people get into this book? How did people's names land in this libreta? First of all, what you needed to do was you needed to go and apply online. Then you had to submit 2 online profiles that displayed the little blue check mark next to your name, signifying that you've been verified by them. Then you had to log in through Facebook so that we can track how often you had ghosted people, how many times you had just abandoned conversations. No. Come on, people. Come on, man. This is the 1980s, right? The 1980s. It was a time when the M on the MTV really stood for music, and that's what they played, right? It was a time when we didn't have to wear motorcycle helmets while we were riding. You could ride in the back of a pickup truck, right? Just cruise around without any seatbelts or anything. And finally, it was a time when ICE, ICE, was just called La Migra. So it was a lot easier to identify La Migra than saying ICE. It was a real simple thing to do to get onto this libreta. All you had to do was first ask for credit. You can pay later, right? Second, everybody was approved. If you asked my dad for credit, you were approved on the spot. There weren't any background checks, or you didn't have to do all this application. You just got approved. And number 3, there was no credit limit. In other words, you could charge up as much as you want and pay it whenever you wanted to. Truly, truly a friendship economy. So we'll go back to a time where, when I was a little bit older, so I wasn't working as much on the truck. I was already in college. I was attending this college called Evergreen Valley College. And my parents' stops, in the route was the police academy in the Evergreen Hills in East San Jose. And Evergreen College was just around the corner. It was an easy drive for me to go. So I'd often go eat there at lunchtime. It wasn't just the cadets that my parents were servicing. Construction workers would go there. Other people in local offices, if they knew my parents were there, they would go and get their lunch there. So it was pretty busy. All right. So one day I was standing there waiting for the crowd to die down a little bit so I could ask my mom for something to eat. And while I was waiting there, it was kind of crowded, I overheard this guy, this construction worker, telling his buddy how he gets over on this old man. And I knew he was talking about my dad, who was a little bit down the ways, charging people. Clearly, he did not know I was his son. So I quietly went over to stand right next to my dad. Next to this little table he'd often set up on the ground level where customers would go and pay for their meals. Maybe one day I'll do an episode on this table. We used to call it La Mesa. And just like La Libreta, La Mesa had an adventurous life of its own. But that'll be for a later episode. I'm cracking up because there's oh God, good memories. Anyway, right at the table, this little mesa, my dad used to put the libreta right next to it, the little notebook, so that my dad could access it whenever customers wanted credit, and it was easily available to him to open it up and put it in there. Well, sure enough, this guy comes up, this Joe Dirt looking mother effer, right? And you could tell I'm not really happy with the guy because I felt he was talking crap. So he comes up with his burger and a soda on his other hand, and as he's coming up, he just signals to my dad, right? I'm looking at him and he just kind of signals. I guess they had gestures between each other, and this gesture was like, hey, can I pay you later? That's what it seemed. And so I look at my dad and I see him nod his head as to acknowledge and approve. I'm like, oh, Jesus. So I look at my dad as this Joe Dirt and mother effer walks away, and I ask him, he's in the libreta? ¿Está él en la libreta? And my dad says, yeah. Well, he's tending to other customers coming forward. So at first I'm kind of like angry, a little pissed, right? Because for sure, I thought I'd clown this fool when he approached, but clearly I didn't get a chance because of, before you knew it, the knot happened and the guy just walks away. But then I'm like, how long have you known him? I asked my dad. And he says, the guy's been around for some time, so many years. And I'm like, always working construction projects, he says, near around here. And he always seems to show up. So, yeah, we've gotten to know him through the years. And I'm like, well, Dad, have you been given credit for a long time? And my dad says, yeah. I'm like, what's his name? And my dad's like, I don't know. I just know him as el tarugo. Es un pobrecito. Es uno de los mencitos. So if you understand Spanish, you know just what I said. But for those of you who don't, I'll try to translate the best I can to give it its context. Tarugo is a slang word. It means sort of like a soft dumbass, like a little slow, right? And pobrecito is someone who you feel sorry for, like, oh, pobrecito. And mencito is like... menso is kind of like dumb, but it's a combination of all those three. Mencito is like, oh, you feel sorry for him. He's a little slow. It's a subtle way. It's not intended to be offensive, but you clearly don't. So that's how my dad had him on this book. That was his name, El Tarugo. This was clearly very interesting to me. Wanted to know more, but I had to wait because it was too busy. Remember, it was middle of lunch, and I had to wait for it to slow down, for people to get serviced and eventually go. When it finally slowed down enough to have the talk with my dad, I asked him about him again, and he explained to me that he's known this guy for quite a while, and that he's always felt bad for him because he never seems to get out of the rut that he's in. Obviously, I judged this guy right away, and now that made sense because I called him Joe Dirt. He just looked sloppy, he just looked like, I hate to say it, but he looked like white trash. But the guy was out there and working, so clearly I'm judging, and I shouldn't be doing that. So my dad tells me one of the reasons he knows him is because many in the construction crews that he's been servicing throughout the years would talk about how slow and useless this guy was. My dad's like a bartender, right? My dad, because of the truck, he's like a bartender. People would always tell him stuff. So he knew a lot about the people he serviced. It's kind of funny. That's why I said he's like a bartender. He knows a lot. Anyway, my dad tells me he felt sorry for this guy because as the years went on, he would see people move on to bigger roles in the construction industry, right? He would see people, he would meet them in the beginning, and then next thing you know, they'd be, superintendents or their foremen or whatever, and he'd see people move on. Yet this guy was always in the same position. I believe in the construction industry, they call them scrappers. They're beginners. And for many years, this guy continued to be in those positions. So my dad felt sorry for him. This guy, he always didn't have enough money. He didn't have enough money to pay. And my dad simply felt sorry for him. So I tell my dad what I had heard Joe Dirt telling this other guy. My dad first he takes a little bit of a step back. He looked a little bothered, but then he kind of shrugged it off. And if you remember, if you're an existing listener to the show, and if you remember the episode when I talked about forgiveness, if you haven't heard that episode, go back and hear it, because it'll make more sense of how my dad is. But anyway, my dad first, he gets upset, but then he just shrugs it off. And I figured, so at this point I asked my dad, are you going to take him off the book? My dad doesn't even hesitate. He says no. I'm like, well, why not? ¿Por qué no? And my dad says, if you're ever in a position to feed someone, you should always do it. We're lucky to be in this position. We're lucky to have a food truck. We're lucky to have this libreta. talk about a lesson at that moment. Yeah, it's easy to judge. Just like my friend, when she said she wouldn't give people money on the streets because she felt that it would go to waste. So it's easy to judge. I understand that. How the hell are you going to be making money if you're giving food away? My dad would tell me most people pay. And clearly most people paid because they spent so many years in the business. And some, they probably ate for free. But most people paid. And it wasn't always in cash. Some people would give my dad tools. Some people would give my mom paintings, things that you could hang on the wall. Some people would give my dad TVs, and my dad loved TVs. So he had a TV everywhere. So yeah, he would take those. If somebody couldn't pay, he was like, hey, I got a TV. My dad, well, I'll take the TV. And then some other people would pay my parents in services, like cleaning up the yard or doing something as a favor, putting up a wall, construction, or servicing the truck, helping them change the oil on the truck. Some people may confuse this friendship economy with the old, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. Nah, that's not what this is. The you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, that's more like affirmative action. That's more like the good old boys club. It's who you know, not what you know. The friendship economy isn't that. The friendship economy does not rely on extrinsic values or items. It relies on intrinsic values. It's a reciprocity that you just don't see. It's the belief that good things will happen down the line, and you never know, and you never have to know how exactly and why good things happen. It's La Libreta. And that is all for this episode. Thank you very much for making us a part of your day. We appreciate every time we see the downloads come in. And look, it is great to be a part of this. I do want to say, I've been saying this for a while, but I think it's coming. This website with some merchandise. I'm putting some merchandise. And the merchandise is simply to help my parents. It is merchandise that any of the proceeds that come in will go directly to my parents. In the coming months, perhaps I'll let you know why. But I've just gotten some great feedback from people when I have tried to let them know that once I put up stuff, let me send you a code, a coupon code where you don't have to pay for it. And the feedback that I've gotten is just amazing. It really is amazing because the feedback... Man, I get a little emotional with this, but the feedback simply says that they want to pay. And just reminds me that we still live in a good world. So anyway, as I put this website together, the proceeds will go to my parents. So anyway, that is it for now. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and got to know a little bit more about La Libreta. And I do want to thank Screech Beats, Flobama, and the rest of Caesar Omega for providing us with a theme song. And until next time, I'm Isidro Salas. And this is 10,000 Tacos.